Where you are tuning in from. This is The Awesome Journey, and I am your host, Kelly Steinicke, along with my co-host in care, Christy Howard. And we're just two girls that connected on LinkedIn 15 years ago, live on opposite sides of the country, have giving hearts, a passion for paying it forward, and I may have prayed to be living louder in my purpose. And now here we sit in front of microphones, bringing you The Awesome Journey. And today I'm going to do our intro a little bit different than normal. For a couple of reasons. Gregg is having a difficult time getting on Restream this morning, so Christy is still working with him, trying to make do and make it happen. So we're working on that. But in the meantime, I do want to say what I wanted to change about this intro anyways with Gregg was, one, how the heck is it December? And two, a friendly reminder to everyone to take time to reflect on all the things that have been accomplished this year. I think we tend to focus too much on things that we have not accomplished. And that led me to want to do something a little different in this intro today, because it's crazy to think that it's been just a year ago. It was last November that I reached out to Christy and was
here.
like,
Adam, oh, but I don't see you.
I can't believe that. Oh, you can't see me?
No. Nope. You've got two. Oh, you know why? I gotta hang up.
I'll hang up the phone.
There we go.
I love life and rolling with the punches. So while we continue to get this working,
we can't see you, Gregg. I see a floor.
Oh, there.
He's playing around with it. We at least got him on. Sorry.
Yes, we've got him on. So we're making this happen. Look at that. Yeah.
Okay. So
victory.
Okay.
Yes. So everyone, thank you for your patience in working through this. But to finish my little deal as far as looking back on this year, Christy and I just started this in April and have had an incredible opportunity to have so many conversations with amazing human beings and meet some incredible individuals, like our guest today, retired U.S. Major General Gregg Martin, who we are just honored, thrilled, privileged, and blessed to have with us today. And y'all, when I give you a little bit of his background, just do know that I'm giving you such a surface level of all of his accomplishments because they're incredible. He served over 36 years. He was in command of engineer company battalion. He was the president of the National Defense University. He received his PhD and I believe 2 master's degrees from MIT. He is also a graduate of West Point, is highly decorated and received numerous awards. And he was one of those phone calls that when we got off the Zoom call, I was like, oh my God, I just got off a call with Major General. And to put it into context for those of you that may not know, his boss was the highest ranking officer in the land at DOD. So super excited about that. And he just released his new book in September called Bipolar General. It's about his continued war with mental illness. And his story, y'all, is just amazing. And we're going to talk about his journey through his career with the Army, and then also to his diagnosis of bipolar I with psychosis, and where that path has now led him, and his purpose in life has changed to where he wants to bring more awareness to mental health, remove the stigma, create healing, and save lives, which, what a gift. And I believe you even referenced your bipolarness as a gift. And I believe it is. You are a gift from God for what you are doing, and such a great messenger to be such an ardent advocate for mental health and spreading your message. And we're just grateful to be one little small conduit on this journey of yours to share your story. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for dealing with all the technical getting you on. We appreciate your patience. And before we turn it over to Gregg, because y'all get your coffee, get your tea, you want to listen to this one, I promise you. And I will be sharing all the links to his contact, to his website, to his book in the comments, as well as post promo, as well as additional posts that I do for our other guests, since we are coming up on the end of the year and the holidays. All these books will make great stocking stuffers, gifts, host gifts, gifts to yourself while you travel over the holidays. Or if you're wondering what to send me or Christy, we would love an autographed version. Hint, hint, ha. So all of that being said, again, we're so grateful to have you. And I will turn it now over to my co-host in care, who I could not do any of this without. And I appreciate you and your tech help always, my sister, Christy Howard.
Somehow we figured it out. And yeah, Greg, I'm excited about this. I was actually talking to my pastor, who is also bipolar. And it's a conversation that I'm now very interested in, because turning 62 next month, I realized that when I was younger, you never even heard of that. You know, you never heard of, and then if you went to a psychiatrist and everything, your parents are like, push it underneath the carpet. You don't talk about that. We're not dysfunctional, blah, blah, blah. So I've always been very interested in the mental health, just because of my own depression and because I didn't push it. I dance with my skeletons, and more successful men, really, that we have met are, dancing with your skeletons. You're sharing. And it's just a subject that it enthralls. I don't want to say enthralls me. I'm just very curious of understanding it and seeing how you all, you as successful as you were, but now to be able to say, hey, this is the journey that I went through, and here I am, and I want to help other people that are going through this journey so they don't have to go through it. So the stage is yours. And again, we're blessed that you're here, and we're really blessed that we got you on.
Yes.
And you're not the only person that's had technical issues.
Yes.
Definitely not.
Well, Kelly and Christy, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I love your show, and it really is making a positive difference in the world. So thanks very much. So my story is, my whole life, I was blessed with, high level achievement, all the way until I got fired, forced to retire, and hospitalized. But prior to that, I had, all success from, high school on. I had in high school, I was, the all-star athlete, the top student, one of the top leaders. I then went to West Point, where I excelled. Army Ranger School, then out in the Army as a young officer, where, platoon leader, company commander, with the soldiers, down in the trenches, doing the hard stuff. And I just loved it. I had unusually high levels of energy, drive, enthusiasm. I was really an extrovert, worked very, very hard, loved the Army, was kind of like the perfect soldier. With motivation and athleticism and taking care of the troops and all that stuff. And only recently have I found out that bipolar disorder, it's not an on-off switch. Like one day you don't have it, then you flip a switch and you do have it. It's much more of a glide path, or of a spectrum. And so, unknown to me, I had the bipolar gene and a bipolar brain my whole life, but I didn't get diagnosed until I was 58 years old. And so what those low levels of, bipolarism, if you use that term, what it did is my brain produced and distributed unusually high levels of dopamine and endorphins, which gave me extra energy, drive, enthusiasm, and all the rest, which gave me a huge advantage and boosted my natural talents and enhanced my performance for years and decades, from high school on as an Army officer. I ran 7 marathons in 2 years when I was a lieutenant over in Germany. In fact, all of them under 3 hours, including a 2:36. When the Army picked me, they said, hey, you're really successful and you have great potential. We want to send you to graduate school. So they said, your mission is to go get 1 master's degree in engineering from MIT. And I came out of the experience with 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and I completed the Army Command and Staff College by correspondence. Now that is very unusual performance. It's really not normal, but it was evidence unknown at the time of having a bipolar brain, with all that extra energy, problem-solving ability, creativity. And so that type of overachievement continued all through my Army career. I kept getting promoted and picked for higher commands in the different schools. And the turning point for me, though, was in 2003, where I was a brigade commander. I was in charge of about 10,000 troops in the first year of the Iraq War. And what happened was I was moving up this glide path continuously. And you can think of the bipolar spectrum as a fire. Like when you want to light a fire, you start with a little flame, you put some kindling on, a little bigger flame, some more sticks, and then pretty soon you have a real fire going. And so for me, the trigger into my bipolar onset was the Iraq War. I already had the genetic predisposition, totally unknown to me, but I found all that out later. And what it took for my onset was a triggering event. And a triggering event is typically something that's very stressful, traumatic, pressure, and all of that came together for me in the Iraq War, where I was, commanding all these troops in combat. And it was not only pressure and stress, but it was euphoric. It was thrilling. I was unbelievably happy and upbeat during combat. And all of that, what happened was when we attacked from Kuwait into Iraq, I could feel myself elevate. I didn't know it was mania, but I felt phenomenal, like I was just high, felt like Superman. My problem-solving abilities just went through the roof. My mind was so sharp. My energy levels were incredible. I could see and picture and understand the battlefield and solve problems before anybody else knew there was a problem. And I'm making these decisions, life and death decisions, under fire in combat. And all of that together just lifted me into mania, where my brain started producing more and more of these key chemicals like dopamine and endorphins and distributing them in my brain, which enhanced my performance even more. So that went on for pretty much the whole year in Iraq.
So I'm known for the interruption because I got some questions. But my question is, Gregg, did it, like your wife, did anyone notice that, you're Superman and this is not normal? Or they're just like, he's succeeding, he's succeeding, we're winning, we're doing everything. I mean, that's my one question, but I do have another question from our guest, but Dave Snell says hi.
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Jeff wants to know, didn't realize there was a bipolar gene. How do you find out more about that? How do you all of a sudden say, there's something wrong with me? And the doctors, because I do ask the questions all over the place, do the doctors say, no, you're in depression? Or do they say, let's go a little bit deeper nowadays?
And I think even to layer onto that, because your story, Gregg, I believe, because you have 3 boys, if I'm not mistaken, and 2 of them were diagnosed with the gene before you even knew that you had it, right?
Yes.
And what was that all like? Because like Christy's saying, and your example of your career, because bipolar and I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, if it was the hyperthymia, I mean, your internal drug that was going off, giving you this superhuman ability,
Superman.
that was your friend until it wasn't.
Correct. So the hyperthymia, which is a near continuous case of mild mania, which gives you all that extra energy and so forth, that was my friend. It boosted me tremendously and was, I think, was a significant part of my success in the Army. And then when I went into mania, at the beginning, because my onset was in 2003, and I wasn't fired from my job and retired and diagnosed until 2014, when I went into full-blown mania. So no longer mild mania, full-blown, where you go so high, you're like a rocket, hurtling into space, and you're out of control. Your judgment starts getting questionable. You have all this grandiosity and religiosity and, impulsive behavior. So it wasn't until full-blown mania in 2014 that people started to really notice, wow, what's going on with this guy? This is very unusual, strange, even frightening behavior. And that's when they started writing anonymous reports to my boss, the chairman, saying, hey, there's something really going wrong with Gregg Martin. And that's when the chairman decided to remove me from command. So people really didn't notice it until the very end, when I rocketed into full-blown mania and my bipolar disorder became a raging bonfire out of control. And that included my wife. So even though, remember, we met when we were in our early 20s, and so she liked all the energy and enthusiasm and fun. And I mean, I was funny and the life of the party, and we went skiing all the time and hiking, and we just had a blast, dancing, fun. And so my bipolar disorder it just crept up the spectrum, little by little, year after year, decade after decade. So it was imperceptible to her and other people who knew me. And when I would go into a new Army unit, all they knew was, wow, this commander really has some energy, and he's really motivated. I like being around this guy. It's exciting. It's fun. He has tons of energy. And so it was an advantage that made me more successful and, if you will, popular with the troops, until it went too high, and then I was out of control.
So explain to me out of control.
Yeah.
What was an example of out of control?
So number of different factors. Number one, grandiosity. I totally believed I was the smartest person in the world, that I held the key to world peace. I developed an idea called Global Security University, which, if implemented, would have really enhanced world peace. But it was beyond the capability of the Department of Defense to ever do it. But I believed in it fervently. I talked about it constantly. I gave lectures on it. I recruited people to join the university, both as faculty, staff, and students. Even though it didn't exist, I was recruiting people and putting it together before it existed. It was really pretty amazing. And I didn't tell my boss I was doing this. And so he was not happy when he found out about it, that I was recruiting students for a university that he didn't know about, hadn't approved, and still didn't even exist. So then on top of that, I had this idea of religiosity, where I believed I was an apostle sent by God to transform the Department of Defense, because I had been given all these different assignments to lead transformation at these, at National Defense University, Army War College, Fort Leonard Wood, et cetera. And so I believe that God had chosen me to go to these places and do his mission. And so I didn't see it as Gregg Martin's mission or the chairman's. I saw this as coming, directly from God. I had psychosis along with the religiosity, to where, and these are hallucinations and delusions. So I hallucinated that I saw many times the Holy Spirit descend in front of me, come down to earth, and it was a beautiful thing. But I also saw little packs of demons attack our house, and and I put Bibles and holy water and crosses up in the windows and doors, to where, and then I saw the demons fly trying to attack our house, and then they were repelled and they did a U-turn and they flew away. I had paranoid delusions that people were watching and spying on me, and they were out to get me with a plot to convict me of crimes against the government, where I would be arrested, put in jail, murdered, lose all benefits. My wife would, have no money from retirement because I was convicted of a felony. And so I became very suspicious and wary of people. That was part of the out of control. I started making decisions at the university where I would just say, okay, God wants me to do this. And I would make big decisions without hardly consulting anybody to make these decisions. And they were big decisions, and they mostly were not bad decisions, but they were overly aggressive. They were too much, too fast. It overwhelmed the culture and the social structure of the university I was at, because people, especially civilian leaders in government institutions, they don't want to change at all at any
Yeah.
point, let alone these bold, aggressive, transformational changes I was trying to put in place. So I got reckless and impatient and out of control. I would take over lectures in classrooms. I would go into the lecture or the classroom, and I would just like go to the front and take charge and start preaching about global security university and how it was the key to world peace. Meetings would go on forever. I would talk endlessly, sometimes for hours. I started getting less and less sleep. And then I went about 3 months with no sleep, which
Wow.
then fueled my mania even more. I would go out on late night bike rides, and I would hallucinate that I could lift up off the ground and fly over the monuments in Washington, D.C. I had kind of some scary encounters with the police where if things had gone a little bit different, I could have been shot, I could have been arrested, put in jail, any number of things, because my judgment was really poor when I was in a manic state. And I was out of control, impulsive, risky behavior, and so on and so forth.
I'm sorry, during this time, Gregg, I mean, first of all, it sounds terrifying, quite honestly. Did you have any type of conscious awareness, like this is not normal? Or were people starting to say to you, hey, man, you're out of control here?
Well, when I was in a state of mania, I felt great because your brain is flooded with dopamine and endorphins. So you feel phenomenal. I was continuously receiving extremely positive feedback from my 4-star level supervisors saying, hey, you're doing a great job, keep going, push harder, don't slow down. This is wonderful. You're doing great. And so I felt great. I was getting fabulous feedback. And so I didn't think there was anything wrong with me in any of these weird hallucination, delusion type of things. I just took them in course, like, okay, I am an extremely unusual human being. I'm blessed and lifted up by God. I'm God's apostle. Miracles happen. This is, God's way of lifting me above the rest of the human race. And so, no, I saw zero, nothing at all wrong with anything that was going on in my behavior or my thinking. Even when I was getting no sleep for 3 months, I just said, well, that's God blessing me so I can get more work done and I don't need to sleep. And, God can work miracles. And so that's kind of how I looked at it. But I will say that there were multiple occasions from Iraq on, including the event that led me to go get diagnosed in 2014, when I would go into a state of depression, just the opposite. I said, there's something wrong with me. Because instead of having tons of energy, I have no energy. Instead of my brain, running at 100 miles an hour, my brain is stopped. Instead of being a super extrovert, talking all the time, I'm withdrawn from people. I'm an introvert. Instead of being interested and fascinated endlessly with everything, I was interested in nothing. I was confused. I was indecisive, withdrawn. And so when I was in depression, there were actually 4 different times from Iraq forward that I went to the doctors and reported my depression and said, there's something wrong with me. And they did nothing in terms of gathering collateral information and finding out, well, what's Martin normally like? If they'd have done that type of work, they could have determined that normally I'm up, in some stage, something like mania. And then they could have said, okay, well, this, from mania into depression, kind of sounds and looks like bipolar disorder. But it wasn't until November of 2014, a few months after I had been fired, forced to retire, that they finally made the correct diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And then, of course, I went, as you know, from bad to worse, dove into bipolar hell, and was on the verge of really dying, wanting nothing more than to die for 2 years. So anyway, that's some examples of how it works. You guys, you did ask about the bipolar gene, okay?
Right.
Yeah,
So
I was
the
going to say,
leading,
really go back to that.
So the science community and the leading medical people in the world, they are convinced that there is a bipolar gene, but they have not ever been able to discover it and identify this is the gene, which they can do for many different diseases. And bipolar disorder is a disease of the brain. The
Right.
brain doesn't work right because it's affected by an illness. But they've never been able to identify it. So the only way if you have bipolar disorder is if you're diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And then the way the scientific community explains it is your genetic predisposition for the disorder was triggered by some kind of traumatic event. And so you could have the bipolar genetic predisposition and go your whole life without it being triggered, and thus
Right.
never being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Or like most cases of onset are between 18 and 25, which is when my two sons were diagnosed. They were both 17. And so they were diagnosed with bipolar disorder years before I was, because I wasn't diagnosed until age 58, even though my onset was at 47. And so, them in high school, which is when most people get it, 18 to 25, it was traumatic for them. It was traumatic for our family because you suddenly had these two healthy, successful young men who their life got turned upside down. So, great students turned into bad students, great athletes turned into no athletics at all. Super popular, doing great socially to, withdrawn, no connection with other people. And of course, even though they were diagnosed and treated, their lives have been very, very difficult in terms of relationships, schooling, work, and so forth. So, they were diagnosed, but at that time, no connection was made to me, where people would say, which I think today there would be more of a deliberate connection where people would say, well, these two teenagers got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I wonder if the dad or the mom has it. And so that would have then keyed people to maybe start looking at behaviors in me. But the other thing, though, I mean, I was around thousands of people in the Army for, many, many years. And nobody said anything like, hey, there's something wrong with you. You have too much enthusiasm, too much drive. You're too smart. You're doing too well. You work too hard. You take too good a care of your soldiers. Everybody just said, hey, this guy's doing great.
But do you think that's typical for the military now, for the fact that you go and they're just thinking it's depression, like right now, that the military really, do they even care as long as you're doing a great job?
I think they care to a degree, but I think the mission and the performance is the overriding factor. But how would you decide? I mean, how would you determine that someone who's a superstar, that there's something wrong with them? I mean, how would you
isn't that part of
determine that?
the problem? That was part of the problem with you getting diagnosed, if I'm not mistaken, is because somehow, which this is lame, but it is society. You were so successful and so great at all that you were doing that even, because you were misdiagnosed multiple times when you were like, I'm depressed, I feel like crap. And they were like, no, you're not. You're fine because you're amazing. You're doing amazing things. There can't possibly be anything wrong with you.
Absolutely. You're totally right. So when I went in with depression on those 3 different times, and when I went in 3 different times after I got fired with mania, the doctors looked at me and they saw success. Here's a guy, 2-star general or 1-star or colonel, whichever rank I was at, successful officer, PhD from MIT, very successful command in combat during the Iraq War. And so all they saw was success. Plus they were I think now they were probably intimidated to a degree.
I'm sure.
And they didn't want to, quote unquote, hurt me by giving me a diagnosis of a serious mental illness, bipolar. They didn't want to do that to me. So they treated me with kid gloves. That's one big factor for never diagnosing anything. The other thing was there were people all around me who were seeing my behaviors, but they didn't know what they were seeing because they
Right.
were untrained, because the military, or the army anyway, didn't train people how to identify
Recognize. Right. Which I think is
the
what Christy was hitting on with what she was just saying. And I think another important part to share, definitely before we get into your depression and being diagnosed, and then your 2 years of sheer hell from what it sounds like, is when you were relieved of your duty, what that process was, what that experience was for you, and what General Dempsey had to say to you, and how you felt after that meeting.
Yeah. So spring, summer 2014, unknown to me, I was in full-blown mania. And General Dempsey didn't know either. No, I mean, really nobody knew, except for the fact that the students, the faculty, and the administrators at the school started saying, this guy's really acting bizarrely. And at that point, my wife realized there was something wrong too, and my son, who was living at home. And so it was actually in July of 2014, I'd say 3 months with virtually no sleep, pretty much out of control behavior. Um, the chairman got all these anonymous reports, and he did an investigation and an assessment and decided he knew me very well, was surprised by all of this, which he writes about in the foreword of the book. And he decided he had to do something, both for my good, for the university's good, and for everybody's good. And so I got a call, hey, report to the chairman Monday morning in the Pentagon. And so I went, and I was thinking, okay, I wonder what this is about. He's probably going to tell me what a great job I'm doing, and he wants to keep me in the command even longer. Or maybe he's going to promote me, because it used to be a 3-star position. And, so he's going to tell me what a great job I'm doing, because I had gotten nothing but great feedback from the chairman.
Right.
And so I go in the office, and first person I see is the lawyer. And I'm like, oh, okay, no promotion today, because, when the lawyer's in there, there's nothing good going to happen.
Right.
Right.
And so the chairman came across the room, General Dempsey, and he came across, he gave me a big hug and said, Gregg, I love you like a brother. You've done an amazing job. Nobody could have done what you did at National Defense University in just 2 years. I give you a grade of A+. But your time at NDU is over. You have until 5 p.m. today to resign, or I will fire you. And I'm ordering you to get a mental health evaluation this week at Walter Reed. And so you would think, wow, I'm going to be crushed. I'm going to be really disappointed.
Right.
But I wasn't. I said, thank you, Chairman. This is fantastic news, because God put me in this position to do great things. And now he's going to put me somewhere else to do even bigger things. I said, thank you. And, it's interesting, 9 years later, I think paradoxically, I was correct, because now this bipolar work is more important than anything I did in the Army.
Goosebumps.
Yes.
And so from there, I went and did I did a mental health eval that week, and they said, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And they were totally wrong. They didn't get collateral information. They didn't get all the reports that the chairman saw, that I was basically had gone crazy into a state of madness. I'd gone insane, really bad. And they didn't get that information. So they sent a report back to the Pentagon that said, Martin is fit for duty. There's nothing wrong. So the Pentagon, the chairman's office said, this is crazy. There's definitely something wrong with this guy. And so they sent it back. They said, do another evaluation. So I did a second evaluation, same thing, nothing wrong. So then they said, let's go for a third evaluation. So I did, and they said, nothing wrong. So what happened at that point, and that took a couple of weeks to get all those evaluations. But so then what happened is, in my mind, remember that paranoid delusion I had that people were out to get me? Then I said, aha, the medical professionals say there's nothing wrong. And all those people at NDU said that I essentially had gone crazy and mad, and there was something wrong with me. I said, aha, that's proof that they were out to get me, that they were out to get me fired, which they did. And so then I went into a state of anger, rage, bitterness. And then I spiraled into depression, hopeless, crippling depression, and then terrifying psychosis. And that went on for a while until I said, I've got to do something about this. And I essentially, crawled my way back to Walter Reed to the same doctors and said, hey, I am really sick. There's something wrong with me. And then they were able to put the pieces together, connect the dots and say, okay, bipolar disorder type 1 with psychosis. And then they got the diagnosis correct.
So I want to bring in what Dave said because I can't pull in the whole comment on the ticker. He said, I'm convinced that, and we've had Dave Snell on before, and then last week we had Mike on that was bipolar 2, correct? So there's different levels of bipolar. Because I'm convinced that we all have you can talk, you know me, I can't read. I have Christianese.
But I think this just reiterates what
you going to read it? I can't read it. Can you read? Oh, never mind. I have Christianese today.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, so he's saying, I'm convinced that we all have the propensity to have the disease and the gene to control the switch, and either covered in a thick or thin layer of some material that eroded by a chemical associated with trauma or stressors. When that sheath covering the gene is ended enough, it flips the switch. And I think this goes to what you were saying earlier, Greg, is how it's everybody has the gene, if you will. And I used to remember this is how cancer used to be explained to me. Like everybody's got the gene, but not everybody has it activated. Or there's something in your body, but not everybody has it activated. And it kind of sounds like that's what Dave is explaining, and sort of what you alluded to earlier, is that we all do have the propensity with the gene. It's just a matter if we have the trauma or the event that actually triggers it, which in your example of your own life experience, I mean, I don't know how much more traumatic you get than battle in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all the other places that you've been. So what are your thoughts on Dave's comment there?
Well, hey, Dave, thank you for that. I had never heard that before. The best science that I've heard is that some people are born with the genetic predisposition and some people are born without it. And if you're born without it, then you're not going to get bipolar disorder. That's the way I've learned it from the science literature I've read, from the different medical doctors, from the psychiatrists and so forth. And so I've never heard that everybody has the gene or the propensity, and that if it's the triggering that is the key thing. So, I mean, my knowledge, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist or a neuroscientist or anything like that. Everything I've read is that some people have it, and if they get triggered, they'll have an onset of bipolar disorder, but other people don't have it and they're not going to have bipolar disorder. That's the way I understand it. But I mean,
you probably understand it obviously at a level beyond most of us for so many reasons. And I kind of wanted to go into, when you were that year and a half or 2 years before you were finally diagnosed, when you're talking about living in that space of psychosis and what you referred to as hell, and some of the examples I heard, it sounds incredibly like a hell on earth, is what that time period was like. And then secondarily, how did it finally feel when you were diagnosed? And I mean, nothing's wrong with you to, hey, you have bipolar 1 with psychosis. Like that's a massive whoops.
Yeah. So after I got fired, and for the next couple months, I spiraled steadily down, and I felt horrible in every way, mind, body, spirit. I mean, no energy, no willpower, no interest, just, awful. And so, but I did have the motivation and the willpower to go back to Walter Reed for the 4th time in just a couple of months. I went back and said, I'm sick, please figure out what's wrong with me. And they did figure it out. And so when I talked about it with the doctors, it made sense because I had been so high for so long, and then I plunged into depression. That's what bipolar disorder is. It's this, it's moving from mania, where you have too many of these chemicals, into depression, where you don't have enough of them. So where your brain is just revved up, to then it's just goes to sleep, it goes dormant. And so it made sense to me that bipolar disorder was something that I very likely did have. And so I was really actually very happy, because I said, well, thank you, doctor. Now, I mean, if that's the correct diagnosis, we can put a label on it,
Right.
and I can learn about it, and we can start taking the necessary steps to begin recovery. So thank you very much. And I was actually quite happy about it. And, it's interesting. I never felt the stigma. People say they get ashamed and embarrassed about mental illness. I mean, I never felt that, because I knew right from the get-go, this was something biological. It was physical in my brain. It wasn't due to lack of willpower, lack of character, not trying hard enough. And so I never had any problem with stigma and all that stuff. Unfortunately, my bipolar disorder condition went from bad to worse, and I plummeted even further down than I was, into bipolar hell, as you talked about. So, would you like me to talk a little bit about what bipolar hell was like?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So I got diagnosed November 2014. They started treating me, and they treated me with kid gloves, what they called VIP medicine, because they didn't want to, quote, hurt me and get me sent, have my retirement potentially delayed by a medical review board, or have my retirement or anything bad. They were really worried about it. So they gave me kind of kid glove treatment, and they treated me lightly. In other words, if a young soldier or sailor, or a young officer or NCO had been diagnosed the same way that I was, with the same behaviors, they would have probably been hospitalized, put on some really strong medications, and dealt with in an aggressive manner. Well, that didn't happen with me. I was given a bunch of different medications over a few months. None of them worked. All they did was make me sleepy. Then my retirement date came, and there was no continuity of care plan, which now DOD has fixed that, which is good.
Good.
But I was essentially just kind of tossed out into the civilian community in a state of utter depression, no ability to navigate the civilian healthcare system on my own. There was no connection made with the VA. I mean, they took a very sick, debilitated person and threw them out there to swim on their own in deep water. And so
Which
I got
sucks.
worse and worse.
Exactly. That sucks, because of everything that you did for our country.
Yeah. Amen. Amen, sister.
The good news is DOD has changed that. So every service member who is being treated for a mental health condition, there has to be a deliberate handover to either the VA or a civilian provider, which is a huge step forward. I mean, definitely the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that they've fixed it after my time, because they are getting better. But I got to New Hampshire and immediately had like a complete mental breakdown, where my wife and mother had to take me to the emergency room at the hospital. I probably should have been hospitalized at that point, but they didn't. They didn't hospitalize me. But I went months of treatment by a civilian provider and didn't get better at all, just continued to get worse. All I wanted to do was to die. I mean, thoughts of death and dying were just continuously on my mind. I had no energy, no interest, completely withdrawn, just didn't, I withdrew from everything, didn't communicate with people. Luckily, my wife stayed in communication with key people who were working to get me into a good hospital, a good VA with good inpatient care. So that was kind of a benefit. When I wasn't like lying on my back, staring into space, ruminating about every mistake I'd ever made, I would get up and I would dive headfirst on the hardwood floor, bang my head on the floor, yelling, screaming at God, angry that God had ruined my life. Then I had these hallucinations. The delusion about getting arrested and put in jail, that continued. So I was just scared to death that that the people at NDU were still out to get me, and that I was going to get arrested, put in jail, beaten, stabbed to death, and die gurgling in a pool of my own blood in a prison floor. And that went through my mind continuously. And when that wasn't going through my mind, then I had another hallucination of death, where this powerful invisible force would grab me and throw me underneath a rapidly moving 18-wheeler truck, ripping my arms and legs and head off and throwing them out to the side of the road, bloody stumps. And that went on continuously, thinking about death and dying. And, again, all I wanted to do was to die. And then finally, a friend of mine who, was a very devoted, retired medical officer, was able to work and figure out that there was a very good VA hospital near where I live. And so I got an appointment, went in there, and the psychiatrist, the head psych at White River Junction, Vermont VA, he basically asked the standard questions. Are you suicidal? Well, I wasn't. I didn't want to kill myself. Do you want to hurt others? No. And then he asked a question that nobody has ever asked before, and it should be standard in the psychiatric community. He said, do you ever have morbid thoughts of death or dying? I said, yes, all the time. And then he wanted to know what they were. So I explained, just like I did a couple minutes ago. And he said, okay, that's very serious. Those are called passive suicidal ideations, where you may not want to kill yourself, but you want somebody or something else to kill you. Yep. And that's a passive ideation. He said it's really dangerous because that can morph into an active ideation and then lead to you making a plan and killing yourself. He said, so you really need to stay in our inpatient facility and spend some time. So I did. I spent 2 weeks in the inpatient, locked facility, which was a great experience. I'm really grateful I got to do that. And then I spent 4 more weeks living in a dorm room in the hospital, getting intensive therapy. So I actually spent 6 weeks in the VA hospital. And what I would say is that it stopped my descent. I didn't go any further into the depths of bipolar hell. It sort of arrested my fall. But I didn't really get better. And that didn't happen until several months later, where my wife was just really discouraged with the continued depression. And she got a hold of my doctor and said, hey, you got to try something stronger. And then we made the decision to try kind of bring in the heavy artillery, which is lithium for bipolar disorder. And it was amazing. I literally, inside of a week, like just a few days, my symptoms vanished. They just went away. And I got energy and interest and enthusiasm and drive all came back. And I felt within about a week, I felt the same way I felt prior to bipolar disorder, back when I was, super successful, but not manic. And that was a little over 7 years ago. And then, that combination, the combination of 3 different medications, lithium, Lamictal, and Latuda, plus moving to Florida for the sunshine, the warmth, the brightness, I've been on a continuous journey of recovery and managing my bipolar disorder for the last little over 7 years.
So I want to go into some of the comments. Alexandra. She, and I can say, it was that word that just caught me. You always have that one word that you can't say, and then I have to say Christinese.
Yes, I do.
And then I just go into Christinese. Every time I hear stories like this where the VA yet again fails to help someone like Gregg, who served our country, she said, I just want a Kool-Aid. But then she goes into serious, every time someone who has bravely served our country, I fly into a rage. Okay. And how we were able to stay so how were you able to stay so strong through all of this incredible, I'm seeing she's going through a little things. And I don't think enough psychiatric professionals understand that asking the right questions is key to successfully helping pull someone out of suicide ideation.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna even pull that over what your comment was, Alexandria. So Do you think that they didn't know what questions to ask is because they just don't know?
Yeah, Alexandria, that's a really good question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I would say the military medical system, they 3 times I went in with depression. All 3 times they said, "You're fine," when I
Right.
wasn't fine.
No, you weren't.
And then I went in 3 times with mania and they said, "You're fine." But again, I was really sick.
Right.
But on the 7th time, the military medical system did get it right. And so oftentimes it takes for bipolar disorder 10 years or more from onset to diagnosis. That's not unusual. The average is
Dang.
about 10 or 11 years. Because
Wow.
it's according to the psychiatrists, it's really hard to discern these patterns. It's difficult to diagnose. It's hard to tell.
Wow.
To me, when I look at it, and I don't want to condemn anybody, but if they had done more research on me, who is this guy? What
Yes.
was his behavioral patterns? So I'm seeing him in depression, but what was he like before he came in for
Right.
depression? If they'd have, and the same thing when I was in mania, if they'd have put the pattern together and connected the dots, I think they could have diagnosed me much earlier. I really do.
So was your sons, were your son, because they were diagnosed earlier, sorry, were they having the same symptoms, or were they, I mean, because they were already diagnosed and now you're getting diagnosed, but you were like off the plantation. What was it different what was it different from how they were dealing with it and their actions over yours?
So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1, which
Okay.
means that I had manic events, that I had gone into mania. Now, not only had I gone into mania, I went into extreme mania. I mean, I'm talking like up in the top, 1% of people who have mania. I was like way, way up there, super
Okay.
manic. And I would say that in my life, all the way up until I started after Iraq, I went into a couple of depressions. My time was mostly, mild to moderate mania. And then once after bipolar onset, I was mostly in mania. I'd say 85% of the time I was manic, not depressed.
Okay.
And so again, mania, you don't think there's anything wrong with you. You think you're the smartest person in the world. You feel great. My 2 sons had bipolar type 2. Bipolar type 2, you never have a true manic event, but you're much more characterized by depression. So these 2 young men had mostly, probably 80-90% of the time, depression.
Okay.
Very little low-level mania, nothing at all like what I went into.
Right. So
And
nothing that you
so,
would look at and see a mirror and be like, oh my God, those are some of the same symptoms I'm suffering.
Right. That's what I
right,
was curious about.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question.
So
the
when the gene, because you obviously had it and passed over to your sons, do you think because you were one, it again, I'm speaking Christianese, do you think it dilates? I mean, not dilates. It dilutes to where they only got 2?
That's a great question. Yeah,
Though I got it out.
Christianese, I know.
in many
I got
ways, in some ways, bipolar disorder type 2 is worse because it's mostly depression, which is such a terrible condition to be in.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, depression is much more than just feeling sad or a little down or having a bad day. I mean, it's basically a life-threatening condition where a sick brain underproduces and underdistributes critical biochemicals in order to live a healthy life. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what depression is. And so that, I would rather be, I'm actually kind of grateful I had bipolar disorder type 1 because I was mostly happy and energetic and enthusiastic. And it was kind of a wild ride.
Right.
So the experts, the scientists and the psychiatrists, they don't consider bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. Like they don't say, well, bipolar type 2 is a lesser form of bipolar disorder. No, they don't say that. They don't explain it that way. It's just that they had to give it some kind of a name. So they call it type 2, but it's just that type 2 is very little low-level mania and a lot of depression. So they want to distinguish it from type 1. So I don't know if it got diluted, and I don't know why. If my genetic predisposition was for type 1, I don't know why they came out with type 2. That's a good question. I don't know.
And I think if you could also explain, because I heard you explain how like lithium, how the medication works for you, and how I love how you talk about this, and which is one of the reasons Christy and I wanted to do this, was one, to remove stigma and make this a normal conversation. But our mental health is part of our health. And, just like a diabetic may need insulin in order to live a happier, healthier life, you just so happen to need lithium to live a happier, healthier life. But how that does help you with your manic and your depression, how that works.
So the best way I can explain lithium, and this is non-scientific, this is, Army dude explanation of a very complex biochemical process inside, the cells and the wiring of the incredibly complicated human brain.
Yeah.
To what I think, the way I understand it, and I actually kind of feel this way, is that lithium builds a roof or a ceiling. And so when your bipolar brain decides, oh, I want to go into mania, I'm going to start revving up production of dopamine, and I'm going to start distributing it to the brain so I can take off and start flying again. And I want to feel really good with tons of energy. What the lithium does is it constructs this ceiling or roof that basically the brain, it bumps into it, and it can't go any higher. The roof stops the upward, the overproduction and distribution of these chemicals. And then on the flip side of that, when the brain decides, again, a brain with a disease says, oh, okay, let's stop producing dopamine and let's stop distributing it because I really want to go into depression again. There's a floor, and it basically, the wiring of the brains and the mechanisms in there that produce and distribute the chemicals, it hits the floor and it doesn't go any lower. And I've actually felt this. I think it's a pretty good description. The doctors and scientists that I've explained that little model to say that's a really good way to explain it. And I can feel it. Like if I sense that I'm starting to move up into, from a healthy level into some level of mania, I can feel the lithium combined with my sort of self-preservation, management techniques that I've learned. I can feel it just sort of stop, and it doesn't take off. Like back in the old days, it would have taken off and gone higher and higher into mania. And I can feel the same thing on the depressive side. Like if I do start feeling like my mood is dropping and I'm starting to sink, I can feel it just stop. And then I realize, okay, I'm in this kind of healthy band of not too high, not too low, just right.
I love that. And I need to bring this in, I think, because it's so important. You've been married to your wife, Maggie, I believe, for over 40 years, if I'm not mistaken. But, God bless her. And what a challenge this had to be with her and just for the family, because the family goes through this, right? And I would imagine that had to be, for her to be able to reach out to the doctors and be like, hey, y'all, there is something wrong with my husband. And I know it. Do something more. What a blessing and a gift for you. But what a journey it had to be for her as well.
Totally. I mean, I am, super fortunate, blessed to be married to, a wonderful woman who, her name is Maggie. She was just great. I mean, really rock steady the whole time. you know, could have given up, you know, walked away, but she hung in there, and was, you know, really helpful and supportive. And I'm really, you know, fortunate, you know, that I'm married to her. She wrote a really good piece in the appendix to the book. Her and my three sons all wrote testimonials where they described what the experience was like to them from, you know, through their eyes. And her piece is really, really good. The key to her sort of survival and success was, she calls it perseverance. That was the key thing that enabled her to just keep moving forward, you know, one step at a time, one day at a time. You know, don't give up, just keep moving forward.
God bless her. And I know we're
well, love is an amazing thing. You know,
Yeah.
when you love somebody, sometimes it's tough. It's tough, but you know, love can ground you.
Amen.
Yes.
And help you get through those situations. And like I said, I know we're coming up on the hour here, but as we kind of go around here, Christy, do you have any other questions before we kind of start to wrap here?
No, I know what book I'm going to be reading.
I know, right? And I do want to just again say, Gregg, we can't thank you enough for your time and just, you know, sharing your story so candidly, because I think it's so important. And even there's so many takeaways for so many people. We are all touched by mental health, whether it's with ourselves, someone in our family, someone we know. The more we educate ourselves, I mean, I know I'm a better person just from the guests we've had on here, particularly you and Mike Vanzetta last week. I've learned so much about bipolar that I did not know. And that's how we gain more empathy and compassion for one another, is educating ourselves and understanding. And so as I say all that, you know, in wrap up, Gregg, what are your final thoughts? What can we do to help you, and where can people reach you?
So great question. You guys are just phenomenal. Your interview techniques and questions and everything like that.
I interrupt. There you go. Interrupt.
So
It's our job.
I would say, you know, kind of a call to action. Get smart on the basic common symptoms of the most prevalent mental health disorders. I mean, just do a little homework, go online, say, hey, you know, what are the symptoms of depression, of bipolar disorder? What about PTSD, et cetera? And learn what they are, so that then you can see those. If you detect or see those patterns or behaviors in other people, then you can go to them and say, hey, look, I'm concerned about you because I'm seeing patterns of bipolar disorder or whatever. I think you should go get medical help or get evaluated, because if you don't get help for these mental brain conditions, the path is horrible. I mean, the path ahead, if you don't get help, is, you know, destruction of your marriage, your family, probably addictions, homelessness, prison, and death. I mean, that's what you have to look forward to if you don't get help for these mental conditions. But if you do get help, even though it may be frustrating, like in my case, and you know, finally the VA, well, finally the military system did diagnose me. It was slow, it was erratic, but they did get the diagnosis. And I don't think the civilian world does really any better. And the VA did hospitalize me, and they got me the right medication. And so they actually treated me pretty well. So if you do get help and you do get medical professional, you know, plan and the right medications and therapy and all that stuff, there's every probability that you'll live a healthy, happy, purposeful life. And so I would just say, you know, embrace your friends who maybe are struggling or have a problem, and help them get into care, and persuade them and say, hey, I'll go with you. I'll go to the doctor with you. Let's bring your spouse or your family or your friends, and really encourage them. And the other thing I would say is stigma makes no sense. That is based on ignorance and just dumbness, because it's just, these brain conditions are just as biological and physically real as cancer, heart disease, diabetes. They're just as real.
Absolutely.
The last thing that I will say is that I was really hopeless when I was in bipolar hell. I never thought I'd get better, but it was other people. It was my wife, my battle buddy, who encouraged me, and they said, go get help, hang in there, you're going to get better. And I think all of us can be encouragers and helpers if we
Amen.
get smart on this stuff and we learn what's going on, because knowledge is power. And
Yep.
so, get smart the way, the way the ladies hosting the show, Christy and Kelly, have done. I mean, they're super smart. Dave Snell, many others. And I would say, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but this book is a treasure trove of
Amen.
knowledge about not only bipolar disorder, but all kinds of mental illnesses and brain conditions, and what goes on, what are the dynamics, how to get help, how do you build a recovery that's built to last, and so on and so forth. So I would just, there is hope, and I'm really living proof that there is hope to recover and live a happy, healthy, prosperous life.
That's
Great.
cool.
And where can people connect with you, Gregg?
Best way is through my website, which is www.bipolargeneral.com. Yeah, the website is a great way to go, and I've got a whole bunch, about 20 or so published articles, lots and lots of talks and podcasts. There's other resources that you can connect with on the site, and then if the landing page on the site has got 3 different places if you want you can order the book from. So yeah, it's really a ton of info, and you can connect with me on email by going to the website too.
Excellent. Well, again, I cannot thank you enough for your time. It's a true honor and a privilege, and we have learned so much. And I truly say I'm a better human for crossing paths with you. And you are a gift from God, and I do believe you are apostle of God, because you are a messenger, and you are making a difference in this world, and you are saving lives. So
Yep.
again, we're so grateful just to be a small little conduit on this journey with you. So. God bless you, Gregg, and your family. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, for your comments. Alexandra, it was wonderful to see you. And we will share all of Gregg's links to his book. I do want to give a shout out. He did a book signing in Cocoa Beach. Am I right? Yesterday?
Yes.
On the other side of Florida. Come over to my side.
And nearly ran out of books. So it's doing its job because it's needed out there. And I do, again, highly recommend. Great stocking stuffer, great gift, great hostess gift, great gift for yourself. Let's all get together and learn more, because that way it does help us have more empathy and compassion for one another. Because as I always say, we are all on this journey together, and together we do make it awesome. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week at 1:11 p.m. Eastern Time. Have a great day.